The air around Lake Weir, Florida, felt heavy that January morning in 1935, the kind of thick, unmoving heat that made every sound carry just a little farther than it should. The small white cottage near the water looked quiet, almost ordinary, the kind of place no one would think twice about. But inside, everything was tense. Ma Barker sat at a wooden table, her posture steady, her expression unreadable. Near her rested a Thompson submachine gun, its cold metal a sharp contrast to the stillness in the room. She was not the harmless elderly woman many believed her to be. For years, her name had circulated through law enforcement circles with a mix of frustration and fear, tied to a string of crimes that had grown more daring with time. Her family had not always been at the center of national attention. What began as small-time theft had slowly evolved into something far more organized and dangerous. The Barker-Karpis gang had carried out bank robberies across multiple states, leaving behind a trail of chaos and close calls. But it was the kidnappings that pushed them into a different category entirely. The abduction of William Ham had shocked the public, not just because of the boldness of the crime, but because of the precision with which it had been executed. The ransom was paid, the victim released, and the gang vanished once again, reinforcing their reputation as untouchable. Inside the cottage, the quiet was suddenly broken by a distant but unmistakable voice. It came through a megaphone, echoing across the water and through the trees. Federal agents had surrounded the house. The demand was clear and direct: surrender immediately. There was no confusion about what this meant. The investigation had finally caught up with them. Advances in forensic techniques had played a crucial role. Using a chemical process to reveal fingerprints left on ransom notes, the authorities had managed to connect key members of the gang to the crimes that had previously been difficult to prove. Names that had once been whispered now had evidence attached to them. Standing near the window, Fred Barker peered through the blinds, his eyes scanning the perimeter. He could see movement outside, shadows shifting behind trees and vehicles. There was no clear path out. The exits were covered, and the element of surprise, which had once been their greatest advantage, was gone. The realization settled in quickly. This was not another narrow escape. This was an endpoint. Ma Barker did not panic. She did not rush or hesitate. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried a kind of calm that seemed almost detached from the situation. She told her son to open fire, not as an act of desperation, but as a decision already made. The response was immediate. The sharp, rapid burst of the machine gun shattered the quiet, sending splinters of wood flying from the porch and forcing the agents outside to take cover. In that moment, the standoff transformed into something far more violent. The agents responded with sustained gunfire, bullets tearing through the walls of the cottage, breaking glass, and filling the air with debris. The structure that had once seemed so ordinary began to disintegrate under the pressure. Inside, the noise was overwhelming, each shot echoing through the confined space. The air quickly filled with smoke, making it harder to see and breathe. Yet within that chaos, Ma moved with a kind of controlled efficiency. She reloaded, repositioned, and continued firing, maintaining a rhythm that suggested experience rather than panic. This was not the first time the gang had faced danger. They had evaded capture before, slipping through gaps in law enforcement coordination, relying on speed, secrecy, and a network of contacts that helped them stay one step ahead. They had altered their appearances, used false identities, and taken advantage of weaknesses in the system. But those strategies depended on movement, on the ability to disappear. Inside the cottage, there was nowhere left to go. Outside, the agents maintained their positions, adjusting their approach as the situation unfolded. The exchange of gunfire continued for hours, turning the small property into the center of an intense and prolonged confrontation. The sound carried across the lake, a steady, relentless pattern that replaced the natural quiet of the area. Time seemed to stretch, each minute blending into the next as both sides remained locked in place. Eventually, the pace began to change. The return fire from inside the house became less frequent, less coordinated. The agents, still cautious, waited for any sign that the situation had shifted. When the gunfire finally stopped, the silence that followed felt just as heavy as the noise that had preceded it. It was uncertain, unresolved. No one moved immediately. Tear gas canisters were launched into the cottage, their smoke spreading through the already damaged interior. The expectation was that anyone still inside would be forced out, disoriented and unable to continue. But no one emerged. The silence remained. After a careful wait, the agents approached the house, stepping over debris and shattered wood. The front door, already damaged, offered little resistance. Inside, the scene reflected the intensity of what had taken place. Walls were marked by countless bullet holes, furniture broken apart, the floor littered with fragments of glass and wood. In the center of the room lay Fred Barker. Nearby was Ma Barker, her body positioned close to the weapon she had used to hold off the agents for as long as she could. There was no dramatic final moment, no last words captured for history. The confrontation had ended the only way it realistically could under those circumstances. What remained was the aftermath, both physical and symbolic. The operation was over, but the interpretation of what it meant had only just begun. In the days and years that followed, the story of Ma Barker took on a life of its own. J. Edgar Hoover described her as one of the most dangerous criminal minds of the era, a statement that helped justify the scale and intensity of the operation. It reinforced the idea that the threat she posed had been significant enough to require such a response. But not everyone accepted that version without question. Some saw her differently, not as the architect of the gang's actions, but as a figure shaped by her surroundings, deeply connected to her sons and the life they had built together. They questioned how much control she truly had, and whether her role had been amplified after the fact to fit a more compelling narrative. The lack of clear evidence about her direct involvement in planning certain crimes left room for interpretation. That ambiguity became part of her legacy. She existed somewhere between myth and reality, her story shaped by both documented events and the way those events were later told. The image of an older woman standing her ground in a prolonged shootout challenged expectations and made the story more memorable, regardless of the full truth behind it. As the sun set over Lake Weir that day, the physical traces of the confrontation remained in the damaged structure of the cottage. The bullet marks, the broken walls, and the scattered debris told a clear story of what had happened there. But the meaning of that story was less fixed. It depended on perspective, on which details were emphasized, and on how those details were connected. What could not be disputed was the outcome. The Barker-Karpis gang had reached its end at that location, and one of the most intense manhunts of the time had concluded. The methods used to track them down, including advances in forensic identification, marked a shift in how such cases would be handled in the future. It was a moment where older patterns of crime met newer methods of investigation, and the result reflected that change. In the end, the story of Ma Barker remained compelling, not just because of what happened, but because of the questions it left behind. Whether she was a central figure directing events or a participant caught within them, her presence in that final confrontation ensured that her name would not fade easily. The details of her life, the choices made, and the way those choices were interpreted continued to be discussed long after the gunfire had stopped, keeping the story alive in a way that extended far beyond that single day in Florida.